evening. I'd like to call to order this special town council meeting for Tuesday, May 2nd, 2023 on the budget. Please rise for a moment of silence. Of the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Councillor Allenson. Here. Councillor Carmody.
Here.
Councillor Fishbein.
Here.
Councillor Laffin.
Here.
Councillor Marone.
Here.
Councillor Tata. Here. Councillor Testa.
Here.
Councillor Zandri.
Here.
Chairman Cervoni.
Here. Thank you.
Here we are for motions on the budget. Councillor Tata.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a packet I'll give everybody a copy of. There should be enough for the mayor and comptroller also once it gets down there, please. These proposed budget amendments utilize the same practices exercised in the mayor's proposed budget. However, the numbers change in order to achieve the following four outcomes. Number one, no tax increase. Number two, restored education spending. Number three, additional funding for public safety. And number four, the recognition of ongoing COVID-19 pandemic effects with spending to address these effects. So the package consists of 6 amendments. The first amendment, the mayor's letter to citizens dated March 31st, 2023, the budget introduction letter, proposes the use of $2,870,760 of ARPA funds to fund various fire department, police department, public works, and recreation items. Recognizing the substantial impacts to these departments, as well as to government access TV, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, I propose we use an additional $1,152,236 to fund the following items, thus removing them from the budget while still fully funding them. Line 57301, government access TV production equipment, $5,500. Police cruisers, $115,000. Police department watchguard cameras, $46,834. A loader plow, 12-foot, Public Works, $35,000. Class 8 plowed dump truck, Public Works, $270,000. Hydraulic vehicle lift, Public Works, $15,000. Picnic tables, Parks and Rec, $12,300. Line 57938, emergency management, building repairs, $20,000. Fire pumper year 1 of 2, $425,000, and an additional $425,000 of ARPA may be proposed if the full expenditure must be made in year 1 to fulfill ARPA requirements. CPR compression system for the fire department EMS, $37,300. AED units, fire department EMS, $4,870. General technical rescue equipment, fire department EMS, $10,000. Central Fire Headquarters, Station 2 Building Maintenance Project, fire department, $35,000. Fire hose and appliances, fire department, $50,432. Portable radios and accessories, fire department EMS, $38,000. And firefighting EMS gear and PPE, $32,000. The second amendment, several fire department and police department requests remain unfunded in the mayor's proposed budget. With regard to Attorney Farrell's letter dated April 24th, 2023, it seems prudent to spend these funds expeditiously, along with the items in Section 1 above. I propose we use an additional $66,028 in ARPA funds to fully fund these items, recognizing the extreme stresses, health, physical, and mental, placed on our first responders during the COVID-19 pandemic, and how these items will provide for citizen and first responder health and safety going forward. The items are police ATV, $20,000. Fire EMS gear extractor washer with base, $9,300. Fire EMS two-set gear dryer, $1,900. Fire EMS UTV with commercial insert, $33,000. And Fire EMS accelerant and hydrocarbon detector, $1,828. The third amendment, I propose we fund the following project, which has been an ongoing request from constituents. Sidewalk repairs in the downtown and uptown area to be overseen, prioritized, and contracted by engineering and/or public works, $150,000. The fourth amendment, I propose we restore the following education spending, specifically these strategic plan requests. Board of Ed Pond Hill Elementary School gymnasium floor, $130,000. Board of Ed DAG renovate ball fields, $80,000. And Board of Ed DAG replace back gym floor, $80,000. The fifth amendment, the general government contingency line in the proposed budget is $400,000 more than the current budget. Therefore, I propose we reduce the contingency account by $200,000, removing $100,000 each from line 58820 and 58821. This still increases the contingency account by $200,000 more than it currently stands. And finally, adding to the mayor's proposal to appropriate $6.4 million from reserves audited fund balance, and also recognizing that historically, this appropriation is not used in its entirety, or some years even at all, I propose the appropriation of an additional $2.9 million. And as a note, according to the December 30th, 2022 Annual Comprehensive Financial Report, for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2022, the unassigned fund balance increased by $2.867 million, so this is a net zero if it is used at all. In conclusion, I would like to reiterate that this proposal does not cut anything from the mayor's proposed budget, but rather it adds additional funding for public safety, education, and capital items, all while having no tax increase. Therefore, I move that we accept this budget amendments package in its entirety.
Second.
Moved and seconded. So I have some questions for your, Councilor Tata, for your item 1. To be clear, the additional $1,152,236, that's ARPA funds, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Your item 3, funding the $150,000 for sidewalks, what's the source of that funding?
We'll be adding that to either engineering or public works.
Right, but how, I understand you're adding $150,000 to that budget line, but
So-
is that coming out of the taxable budget?
Yes, and in order to get that to balance, that would play into number 6, which would be using an additional amount from the reserves.
Okay. And item 4, is that coming from the same source? It's anticipating spending an additional $2.9 million in reserves to achieve that?
Correct, that would be part of it, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Councilor Zandri?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Councilor Tata, the numbers that we have in the entirety, so you have 1.152 million on top of the 2.8, correct? So that would be totaling all of that out of ARPA.
Oh, which number are you referring to, number 1?
So yeah, number 1. So we've already got 2.8 in. We're going to add 1.1.
Correct,
That's all ARPA.
correct.
All right, and so that is coming out of the 5.5 bucket that's left. Okay, that doesn't exceed what's already set there. That's just consuming some of it. You're actually designating what you want to use it for.
Correct. Similar to the mayor's with the 2.87, this just adds to, it takes some of those items out of the budget and uses ARPA instead.
Right, so, but it's consuming from available funds that have not yet been allocated, though, right?
Correct.
That's, okay, perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Senna?
Just to clarify, when the mayor, what he's recommending for ARPA, he's cutting from the budget. Nothing in this book will get that appropriated. We'd have to come back. So the same thing would apply there.
You're not getting picked up by the
Sorry.
system.
So basically, in the mayor's budget, same as last year, he's cut those items from the general fund budget, and he's recommending that they're going to come back to be appropriated by this body for ARPA funding. So that would be piggybacking the same process. Just want to clarify that we're all on the same page on that.
So in other words, to be clear, we're not appropriating ARPA funds when we adopt the budget.
Correct.
Okay. So if we follow the same process, then this motion's item 1, those items would just come out of the budget and be appropriated later through ARPA funds.
Correct.
Thank you. Mr. Carmody?
I was just curious, do we know exactly how many unallocated ARPA funds there would be after making or approving this motion?
This is the first I'm seeing of it, so
Councilor Tata, do you have a estimate?
You're not getting picked up by the sound system. Councilor Carmody?
Do you have an estimate as to how much would be unallocated from ARPA?
Total ARPA?
Yeah.
I do not.
Okay.
Well, I'll get the numbers, hold on.
Mayor?
Yeah, I would express real concern about all of it, but most particularly what funds the budget. I mean, there are a number of things here that don't really deal with the budget itself as far as the tax rate, but the additional $2.9 million from reserves pushes us well above where we are now at 6.4 million, and we've made a decided effort to reduce the dependence upon reserves. That is not a good fiscal move and will not be received kindly by the credit rating agencies.
Mr. Chairman, may I respond?
Councilor Tata?
Thank you. If everybody looks at the last page of the packet, this is a spreadsheet. I know we've all seen Councilor Zandri keeps this up to date for us each year. But if we look at the designated reserves each year, and then the next column over, which is the spent reserves, you can see that historically we've never come close to spending it. During my time on the council, I see this more as a number on paper, and the history kind of proves that to be true. So for example, in 21-22, we appropriated $7.9 million. We actually spent $0. The year before that, we appropriated $7.4 million of reserves, and we spent just under $1.7 million. The prior year, we appropriated $6 million, we spent $0. The prior year, we appropriated $6.2 million, we spent $140,000, and you can keep going up the list. I mean, there's a 1, 2, 3, 4, there's a, looks like a 6 or 7 year spread span of time there where we spent $0 in a row, and it was about a $5 million appropriation each year. So I think we all know that there's always money left over from unfunded personnel because we're never fully staffed, but we fund for being fully staffed. And I understand that budgeting rationale, but we also need to recognize that when we do that, there is going to be money left over. And so to add to the appropriation from reserves, like I said, is more of a number on paper because we can see historically that we never spend even usually close to even a quarter of it. Thank you.
Counselor, I'm sorry, Mr. Senna, I'll come back to you, Counselor Zandri. You should have drank more.
So that spreadsheet, it's true that we're not spending the money, but that's a good thing. If you actually dip into the reserves, they're not available to use in the upcoming years. So just looking at these things where this budget, one, we just authorized in the past couple of months almost $40 billion worth of bonds that we're going to have a ratings call, and they're not going to like us using $9 million worth of reserves to balance a budget. This would also create a huge fiscal cliff for the next budget cycle. If you strip out all of the capital and you use 2.9 million in reserves, there's not going to be enough reserves to keep that level. So you're going to have to make up for that next year, and there's a capital request every year. So the logic behind what we do every year is to not cut it all out, because you're going to have to replace it. So those are just my thoughts on that.
Counselor Zandri?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now I have I'm going to make an additional comment to that. Mr. Senna, it's true that we allocate this money, different amounts every single year, but we don't spend it most years. So if I have a salary coming in at home and I have a savings account and I say, okay, I know what I make in salary, I know what I've got in savings, I'm going to throw it all in the checkbook. Now I'm going to wipe my savings out doing that, hypothetically, because I'm moving it over into the checkbook. But at the end of the year when I don't use it, and I earned a little bit more, I'm going to put everything back plus the extra. Or maybe I consumed a little bit of this, and I'm going to put the rest back. That's what we do every year. Every year, we allocate to balance the budget. There's some years it's 4.2, there's some years it's 7.2. Back in 2005, 2006, we allocated 6.9. 6.9 back then, inflation adjusted, is $10 million. 6.9 looks a lot different. And I'll tell you that I've adjusted those dollars to 2022, not after this one last year of big hit either. So to suggest moving from 6.4, adding 2.9 and making it look 9.3, it puts us in the ballpark within $200,000 more or less of 2007, 2008, 2006, 2007, 2005, and 2006, we went over that. All this is inflation adjusted. And again, we had 2 years that we did veto overrides on the budget. And the very first year of that was the discussion element behind moving it up to 7.4 from 6 million. And we only consumed in that year 1.6. So everything else went back. So the reason I wanted to talk about both these elements intertwined is if you think this is a good move, all of us up here, if you think this is a good move to support, understand that there have been years we've allocated more. Allocation doesn't mean spend. And these are all for capital purchases. So the discussion element of, gee, in the future we have to fund these, every year we fund capital purchases. Some we don't, some we defer, some we ball up in packages and bond and so forth. But I don't believe, and Councilor Tata, you can correct me if I'm wrong, there's no operational expenses in this, correct?
That is correct. It's all capital.
So it's all capital. So in a year that we're doing worse, we could also do without something. So I just want everybody to look at this at face value. And the face value is that a portion of this is adjusting what we might leverage out of savings, understanding that in 20 years of tracking this, I don't have a number that goes above $1.7 million actually consumed. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Counselor Fishbein?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank Councilor Tata for putting together this very comprehensive package that hits a lot of the things that we talk about, you know, education and public safety, certainly the pandemic. But Mr. Senna, I just wanted to ask you, the fiscal cliff that you talked about, and I appreciate the comments of Councilor Zandri with regard to the operational versus capital expenditures. Can you just lay out that fiscal cliff for us? Where does it happen as a result of this package?
So the fiscal cliff would happen is if we wind up using $4 million of fund balance. The next time we go to do the budget, that money's not available anymore. So now, not only, you can't even use the 6.4 anymore, you got to go lower than that, just to maintain where we're at. The other part of the fiscal cliff is if you take $1 million of capital out this year, next year you just got to, you have to put that back in, right? That's just normal department's capital is what you're looking at. If you strip it all out one year, the next year you almost have to raise taxes. It's going to be double of what you had. Because you have your normal, right? So even if it's just $1 million, you can't use the reserves anymore, so you have to raise the taxes again. And I hate comparing other towns, but I'm a Southington resident. And for 2 years, they decided they were going to go zero tax, zero tax. And guess what happened? The fiscal cliff. This year, they're raising tax, it's almost 1.8 mils in 1 year. Now, as a taxpayer, I would rather pay a little more each year than saving a little, and then getting walloped.
Okay, so I just wanted to unpack the fiscal cliff as you define it. So where is the, you said if we spend $4 million from reserves, that would create a fiscal cliff. But looking back 2 decades, we've never come close to that, right? So I have to say that that's perhaps not supported. $4 million is not supported by anywhere in any way, shape, or form, the data, but there's got to be some line. So where is that line?
So we try to keep the fund balance undesignated around 10% of the budget. So what we're not taking into account is the budget increases every year. So right now, the mayor's proposed budget's $187 million. So 10% of that is $18 million. Right now, we have 17 million in unassigned. So we're below our threshold. So I'm not saying, we're never going to use the whole amount. It's a placeholder, so you don't have to raise taxes. But if there is a line where you're going to go too far.
And I'm trying to figure out where is that line, because certainly
there's not an exact line, because you never know. If we ever get back to full staff and there's not vacancies, that it's going to get eaten into. I can't give you the exact number, but what I'm concerned about is I'm going to have to go issue bonds, and that's a big number. When we go through the conversations, sorry. They always talk about the strong financial position of the town, the steady management of the town, and this isn't something that the town of Wallingford does. We don't just jump from 6 million to 9 million of reserves. So that's, my fear is having to answer that question.
Okay, well, I'm just trying to work with this fiscal cliff, because that's sort of like, you know, the sky is falling, and I don't want the sky to fall, right? So I'm looking at 3 years ago, and then we used 1.7 million, and the sky didn't fall. So it's got to be something in excess of that to be significant based upon the data that I'm looking at. But the other part that you talked about was the capital expenditures. So, you know, like in here, we're buying a loader plow, a 12-foot loader plow. If we buy it this year, I would think more than likely we're not going to buy another one next year, right? And we go through this list, AED units, we're not going to be, you know.
You're correct, but Public Works is gonna come back, they're gonna ask for a truck, a plow truck. The capital doesn't go away. The department heads are very good, and they try to space out what they ask for each year, and they try to keep it steady. And what I'm trying to say is, if we take $1 million of capital completely out of the budget, next year, that's coming back in. We're going to have to raise taxes to just get to that level.
Well,
That's what I was talking about. Is the
understood, and we're having this exchange, but when you say we're going to have to raise taxes, I have to disagree, because we do have the electric pilot, which by ordinance has to be used on capital expenditures, right? So if we have $1 million in capital expenditures that are necessary next budget, we have by ordinance a fund that is created for capital expenditures, right? So that stuff can come out of cap and non.
rolling stock in vehicles is not a non-recurring expense.
Depending, okay, I'll give you that. But many of these capital expenditures are, so, okay, so then moving to cap and non, and one of the inquiries that we didn't do this year, there's money left in that account from, that's unencumbered, unexpended, from projects that perhaps came in under budget. How much is in cap and non that's sitting there?
I'm going to give you rough estimate, around $530,000.
Okay. So, you know, I suppose if something happened and collectively government recognized that there was a shortfall, there needed to be a transfer, the administration could make a recommendation to us under the current ordinance to transfer money out of that account for that expenditure. That's a stopgap that we have that is available to general government. No?
We've been down this road lots of times. Once it's in there, it's in there. So what this council's done in the past is they didn't let it get there.
I have to differ with you on that. I mean, I believe that the ordinance is set up so that based upon the recommendation of the administration, that it wouldn't make sense that the money just sits there and it can't go anywhere else. It's got to be able to go somewhere, and the administration...
It's got to be used for capital.
Yeah, sure. So when you talk about that another capital expenditure is going to be necessary, we're going to have to raise taxes. There are other places that money can come from. We need a loader plow or something like that. Now, that might not be the traditional bonded capital item, but it's not a recurring operational expense. So the administration can make a request of this body to utilize that money. Now, if the administration doesn't want to make that request, that's a different issue. But I'm just trying to deal with the adversity to what's before us. So, but I thank you for the exchange.
Mr. Chairman,
Mayor.
just on that same point, there's approximately 500,000. We will be coming to you toward the end of this month for 160,000 of that in order to do the 2 basketball courts. The bids came in well above the $200,000 that we have budgeted for the 2 basketball courts, so that would be a source of funds, 160,000 to add to the 200 to be able to do the 2 basketball courts for Park and Recreation. Again, that's a capital project that has a long-term life. We do not fund vehicles and equipment out of cap and non-recurring, the fund itself.
Councilor Zandri?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to call out a little bit from the last exchange. The discussion element was going from 6 million to 9 million, and that the credit agencies wouldn't look fairly to that. I believe that was Mr. Senna's comments, and it's probably, he would know that better than I would. But back in the 2016-2017 budget, we had designated reserves of 4.2 leveraged. We actually utilized 1.4, and then the very following year, we added 3 million to that, 7.2. So we went from 4.2 designated to 7.2. In the 4.2 year, we leveraged 1.4, and then in the 7.2 year, we leveraged 1.5. So even though we raised up the designated reserves, $3 million from one budget to the other, we basically drew the same 2 amounts down. And further, across those 2 drawdowns, and then an additional 140,000 the following year, the year following, we had a $2.4 million surplus. So we basically went from 29.25 million, dropped it down a few years, and came back out 28.5. So all across that, we only leveraged 1.4 in totality. We are back at 27.77 right now as a total general fund balance, just to keep the conversation equal. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Councilor Marone?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. These are sort of the comments that I make every year at budget time. And if you remember that I make them every year, God help you. But so the budget sort of represents, I don't want to say the worst case scenario, but this is every position in town funded, plus everything else that we think we're going to need to run the town. We know that we're not going to fill all the positions, right? So, up here we talk about, underestimating our revenues and overestimating our expenditures. And I think philosophically, the way the mayor has done this is, we know we're not going to have all these positions, but if we fund all the positions, then you sort of don't wind up in a situation at the end of the year where you end up in a deficit. Now, if the mayor, this current mayor or the next mayor, went out and spent the budget to every penny that was in it, we didn't end up in a huge situation, right? Because you would spend the 6 million or 9 million or whatever out of the reserve. But we know that's not going to happen because it's never happened in the past, right? We have items like fire trucks that we put, over multiple years, right? It's like $400,000 a year last year and this year for a pumper truck to get us to, I can't remember what the amount is, but it's like 1.2 million for the whole truck, right? So when we run into a situation where we feel like we need money, the mayor ends up taking, say, $100,000 from that fund and sort of makes adjustments on the fly to keep us at the same amount. So the funny thing is, if you were to look at this chart at the back of the budget item here, and you were to say, what year did the council override the veto without looking at the mill rate, it would be very hard to tell because it's sort of the same system every year, right? So no matter what the council, in some ways the council sort of overstates our impact on this whole process, right? Because if this amendment gets passed, not a lot is going to change in town, except that we're not going to increase taxes needlessly, because we know we're taxing for a number that we don't intend to spend anyhow. So I don't think that there's a great risk in passing this proposal. I think if we don't pass the proposal, then you're just increasing taxes to put it aside. I think if it's a priority to get the budget, the unassigned fund balance to a certain amount, then that should be a line item in the budget to get us to set money aside to do that. But it's not, because we know we have a ton of money, baked into the budget in a whole variety of areas. I mean, if you've been up here a while and you look around, we have like 7 police officers that are not filled, right? We have 5 firefighters that are not filled. There's like 10 people at Public Works that are missing. We're missing the town clerk and the assistant town clerk. I mean, the list goes on and on and on of unfilled positions, right? So there's millions of dollars out there in unfilled payroll. Now, if we hired all these people, obviously that's going to have a big impact on the budget. By the time you hire all these people, we're going to lose an equal number of people, right? So hopefully, we start filling the ranks, especially with some of the department heads and whatnot, but there just isn't a way for us to max out the payroll in the next year. It's just in this economy and with the number of vacancies we have. So I don't think there's anything irresponsible about this. I think that this is just an effort to sort of control the growth of the budget, which I think is admirable. So thank you very much to Councilor Testa. Councilor Tata for coming up with this. Thank you, Councilor Testa, as well, just for being here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Welcome.
Mayor.
Yeah, I obviously have a different viewpoint. I think we've been extremely successful. We have the lowest mill rate in the surrounding towns. We have stability that is enviable to many others. I think if we're not going to budget for the full complement of staffing, then we should reduce the number of people we show in the budget that would be employed. Otherwise, the budget is being dishonest. If we say there are 100 people in police department, then we should be funding 100 people. Because there will come a time when the 100 will be there. Then where does the money come from? And that's some of where this cliff comes in as well. The principles of sound budgeting are well known, and you hear our comptroller speak to them. You can do a lot of things with budgets, and I think we're all aware of what happens in many other communities, in many states, at our federal level. We have been disciplined enough not to fall prey to those political leanings so we don't have a tax increase some year when all of our expenses are going up. Is that credible? All of our expenses, the cost of health care, the salaries, all the costs go up, but we don't keep even with that. We decide, well, it would be an opportune time to please the public, so we'll just come in with no tax increase. That has an inevitable result. It might not happen in one year, but it will happen where the thing collapses. It's happened elsewhere, and it's a formula for a change that I don't think anyone in this town would appreciate. So I cannot in any way be supportive of changing the discipline that has brought this town great success in a financial arena.
Councilor Fishbein?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Sen, I just wanted to go back to the cap and non. Are you aware of the lapse provision in the charter having to do with cap and non?
I don't have the charter in front of me.
Okay, so I'm just going to read it because I'll assume that you knew about it. It says appropriations for construction or for other permanent improvements from whatever source derived shall not lapse until the purpose for which the appropriation was made shall have been accomplished or abandoned, provided such appropriation shall be deemed to have been abandoned if no expenditure from or encumbrance of the appropriation has been made within 3 years of its approval, so on and so forth. So what is the effect of lapsing? Does that just go from the cap and non to the general?
No, that's how that $530 million gets got built up. It doesn't leave that. Once it's in there, it stays there. If it lapses, it stays in that fund, and then we could reappropriate it in that fund.
Okay, but by what vehicle does it stay there? Then lapsing, I mean, usually lapse in other contexts means something different. Like, I always read that to mean that it comes out of cap and non because it's not assigned to a project anymore, and it would lapse to the general. Just like when we have an expenditure that we project for the next year, and that expenditure doesn't get made, that money lapses to the general.
It stays in the cap and non-fund.
Okay, and by what, because I don't see that in the charter nor in the ordinance.
I think it would be accounting principles. I mean, what lapses is the appropriation for a given purpose, not the designation of those funds for capital purposes. What lapses is there's no longer an appropriation, so that money that's held in that capital purposed fund can't be used until it's reappropriated, but it remains in the capital fund.
So, Mr. Senna, have you done a report on lapsing since you've had the position?
Pardon?
I was asking Mr. Senna if he's done a report on lapsing.
Yes, in February, I sent you the report on the cap and non, on what funds lapsed.
For which ones lapsed?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, I just didn't remember getting that. And then that also included the incomplete projects?
So that goes through every project, shows you which ones are being closed. So I can get you a copy of that. It's that you guys create an ordinance that requires that it's reported to you.
Yeah, I'm going off the ordinance that requires the reporting. Because it doesn't indicate in there when that report is due. So, well, it says on February of each fiscal year. So, I'll look back. If all that's, was all that stuff in this last report?
Yes,
Okay.
I believe so.
Then I'm not going to ask you to, I'll find it. That's fine.
I mean, I have it, I can resend it.
Okay, if it's at your fingertips, it'd probably be quicker for me, so. But thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Counselor Laffin?
Thank you. Okay. Well, first of all, credit to Councilor Tata. It's a pretty extensive packet, lots of obviously going through and thought went into this. Agree or disagree? Agree or disagree. Tons of info. We've certainly not made decisions or been upset about making decisions on less information supplied. And this is very thorough, pulling from different lines all over the place. Creative, yet concerns with the use of ARPA. The concern being I guess I just had completely different ideas on the government quote-unquote projects part of ARPA. I thought we were going to do projects like the town hall roof or the scow roof or something like that, things that we could have the money for, go out to bid on, pay for, our crews weren't going to do anyway, nothing else would be held up, and get things done, speed them up instead of the putting money aside as we do over the years or having them out in the 5-year plan. What this starts to amount to year after year, proposal after proposal, is that we just start getting these little things instead of the getting the big things done. And I know that at least myself and others, we've been kind of waiting for all the ARPA stuff to flush out so we could figure out what we have available to make those decisions on. That's a lot to consider all by itself, just the ARPA components. The 2.9 additional million out of the reserves, we all know in the last 10 years, I've died on smaller hills over that kind of dig into the reserves. Just on flat out numbers, let alone like the timing or circumstances of everything. We talked about Moody's. So last year I read the Moody's summary from 2021, right? And this year on November 3rd, Moody's put Wallingford into review, and 2 weeks later decided it's okay for now, they can be stable. We didn't spend the money on this spreadsheet on the last page is not what Moody's is looking at. Moody's is only looking at what are you actually budgeting for right now. And in 2019, when they moved us down, which was only 4 years ago, and I'm reading from the Wallingford report, The downgrade to AA1 reflects Wallingford's recent operating deficits and increase in its debt burden. While these credit factors will be manageable for the town, when considered alongside its tax base, resident wealth, and incomes and long-term liabilities, Wallingford's credit profile is no longer consistent with Moody's at that time highest rating. Just lots of concerns. Again, this will be the most that we've designated into reserves by a lot. And that's going to be a factor. We were already on review. We skated by. And I hope everybody understands that, it didn't affect us the last year or two or three or whatever, that Moody's is considering the whole COVID-19 thing. And that's going away. People, the world, society are weaning off that and no longer leaning on that anymore, or giving those leniences. So lots of concerns. Any hope I have at looking at this, manipulating it, moving it, working with it, I need more time than this to just look at it. But as I think, to be fair, you can almost forget the rest of that, because we know my issue would ultimately be the 9 plus almost $10 million taken out of reserves. So it almost makes the rest of it moot. Thanks.
Councilor Morone, did I see your hand?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Just very briefly, I guess to me the real beauty of this, and this sort of counterpoint to Mr. Laffin's eloquent points, is that really what's been done here is just adjustments to what the mayor had already proposed, right? There's not really anything earth-shattering here. So the mayor was taking money out of ARPA to use for certain purposes. This just takes it a little bit further, right? And so this is really just adjustments to sort of the philosophical manner in which the mayor manages the town now. So I guess that's kind of what is attractive of this proposal to me, is that we're sort of dipping a toe in the water and changing things, but really not changing anything. And, the credit rating went down through no fault of ours, right? And now we're taking on a huge debt load. So, there's no guarantees, as to what's going to happen in the future. And I understand what Moody said in the rating, but I mean, if you look at the whole package, financially we were probably in a better position then than we are now, right? With the debt we're taking on and the increase in salaries and benefits, and the inflation and so on and so forth. So this is always sort of the argument, right? It's like every year we go through this same discussion, which is like, we want to make a change, and then some folks are like, well, that's too much change, it's too risky, right? But I think that the history has shown us that that this little bit of risk is really quite tolerable for the, for the town and the tax base. But thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Councilor Laffin is asked to respond.
Just as a clarification, yes, and it's part of my appreciation for Councilor Tada's work, that it follows in lines with in general, with processes or policies or practices that I would go with. Well, it's the details are in the numbers, and the $3 million. We're going to take a little more off reserve. We're going to almost take 50% off what we're 50% additionally more than what we were originally looking at, and that's the. And I know that might not be everybody's issue, but it is mine, and it has been for the last decade. So that's all. Thanks.
Councilor Tada?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to address a couple of things that came up. When I was creating this, I was very, very careful to use the exact same methods that the mayor used in his proposed budget. I thought of several ways that would have been a lot easier and a lot less complicated to achieve the same outcome. But what I wanted to do was use those same methods the mayor used to get the most people on board and to hopefully avoid a veto. And what I seem to be hearing is that, and this is what I can't quite understand, when the mayor does it, it's sound fiscal management, but when Christina does it, it's a financial calamity is about to ensue. And that's been the case the past couple of years. And if we look historically, the years that we had a budget package where we did very similar things, such as increasing the appropriation from reserves. We can historically see now that the years when the council did override the mayor's veto, that there was no financial calamity, I'll say, and everything went along just fine. So I'm glad that we have a few years that we can look back on to just see what the results were. In regards to the ARPA spending, so the mayor, again, the mayor in his proposal used almost 2.9 million of ARPA funds to fund various fire department, police department, public works and recreation items. I took it a little bit further, proposing that we use an additional 1.1 million. So again, had the mayor proposed that entire amount, would anybody be questioning it? I don't think so. Nobody's really questioning the 2.8 million, but when we go to add an additional 1 million, that seems to be when the concern comes in. I also wanted to draw everyone's attention to, in the packet, I included Attorney Farrell's letter dated April 24th, 2023 in regards to ARPA funds. So the council just received this on the 24th, like I said. I just want to read that letter for the record. Again, this is from Attorney Farrell. He says, I wanted to make sure you saw or heard over the weekend that part of the Congressional Republicans' tax plan that they intend to pass in the House this week includes a proposal to claw back any ARPA money that has not yet been spent. I'm not sure whether that would apply to money already distributed out to states and municipalities, but it may. We would all be seen in a bad light if somehow Wallingford lost its ARPA funds that have not been obligated for the reason that we had not yet approved its uses. I just thought I would share with you my concerns. I think the clock is ticking, and then receiving that letter made me even more nervous that there is a good potential here that we could lose our ARPA funds if we don't start spending them. So while I understand, Councilor Laffin, the hope that we would have some big projects, that certainly was my hope as well. I think things have changed, and as time goes on, I'm less and less hopeful that that's going to be happening. So I think just spending it on capital items that will save taxpayers money, whether it's a big item or several smaller items, we still need to use it. And for the items that I propose, I think everybody would agree. We certainly need to get a roof on Town Hall, but I'm proposing here that we get PPE for our firefighters. There's a proposal for a gear extractor washer for the firefighters, so when they leave scenes and they have carcinogens on their gear and they need those washed. They were on the front lines during the pandemic. I can't really think of a better use for this, and these are relatively small dollar amount items. That's all I have for now. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Councilor Testa.
Thank you. I want to thank Councilor Tata for this, the amount of work she put into this and the thought and the discussion it's led to. I have various just thoughts on this I'd like to share. And Councilor Marone, his last comments were very similar to the point I would like to make, and it's something I brought up many years, because there have been years when I've proposed using more money from reserves than the mayor in any individual, particular year, and I made the point that we're not arguing over principle, we're arguing over scale. And in this particular proposal, in this particular budget, it applies to two things. It applies to the use of ARPA money, and it applies to the use of reserves. I did want to question the fact that the mayor's budget includes 2.8, almost $3 million, let's round off for now, almost $3 million of ARPA funds in his proposed budget to us. Something that we didn't, it wasn't even discussed with us. And I had brought up this possibility a few months ago, and I had simply requested that any potential use of ARPA money be handled through mutual discussion between the administration and the council. So I anticipated we'd probably see something in the budget, and there's almost $3 million in items that would be paid for with ARPA funds. Now, to suggest that Councilor Tada's proposal to utilize an additional $1 million, I'm rounding down a little bit, but just for numbers' sake, is somehow excessive or irresponsible or wrong, is really then just saying it's an argument over scale. What is an appropriate amount? Similarly, when we talk about the use of reserves, again, it's not a matter of principle, because we always allocate money from reserves into the budget. So if we say we want to, Councilor Todd is suggesting actually a big jump in how much reserves we use. Again, that's a matter of scale, not principle. However, I do have some concerns about the scale, and I can appreciate the controller's concerns, that we might be getting to a total amount that can jar the credit agencies or put us in a little bit of a uncomfortable position going down the road. But I would then refer back to Councilor Tada's point that in effect, the additional amount that she's proposing is pretty much equal to the amount the balance increased by in the last year. So it's really kind of a net zero, as she said. The mayor's proposing what he's proposing, which is, again, similar to what was in last year and the year before and so on. That's where I'm thinking, okay? So we're talking about at what point are we comfortable? Not we're arguing over something that we disagree with on principle. Getting back to the ARPA money, the use of the ARPA money, I read Councilor Farrell's letter with seriously, but it didn't frighten me to the point where we have to, let's hurry up. Oh my goodness, now we got to spend it. Because frankly, we've just been waiting to talk about this as a council. What are we going to do on the government side of this with the ARPA money? We can do this next week, which I'm actually going to propose that we start talking about it next week, and make some decisions. I know everybody is saying, and we've been criticized constantly, and rightfully, I would say, for dragging this out, but at the same time, things are being done. And as we work out what we're doing with the businesses and the nonprofits, we've always said, sooner or later, we need to sit down and talk about what we're going to do as a government with the roughly $13 million we have to spend. We do have a list of things to look at, none of which is reflected in the mayor's proposed use of ARPA money or Councilor Tada's proposed use of ARPA money. We have a list of things we wanted to talk about as a council. And it seems like every time I turn around, we're spending more ARPA money in a way that we just said we weren't going to do. It's a little frustrating. But I understand the needs. And if we talked about, we were saying how much is there. Well, I just did a rough estimate. We said about 13 million we were going to use for government municipal projects or spending. we set aside 5 million for the pool. We didn't spend it. We don't have to. We could change our mind. But that's 5. The mayor's proposing we use 3 million. I don't remember, but how much has the administration already spent out of that? Is it $500,000, roughly?
Spent out of what?
The ARPA money.
We haven't spent anything.
Well, you appropriated or
I just think we haven't, we'd have to look at the applications that have come in and ones that have been approved. I don't have the total of that. Do you have that, Tim?
The only governmental thing that was approved was the cameras last week.
Is what?
Is the cameras.
That was it?
That's the only municipal project that's been approved.
I mean, just so I can.
Okay,
I
all right,
think-
that's fine.
Oh, no, but I think we're getting confused. The proposals in the budget with regard to ARPA doesn't appropriate the money. That's a suggestion of how we can fund those things. That will require a separate action to fund out of ARPA. ARPA isn't the subject here. We're not appropriating from ARPA. We're not appropriating money from ARPA
Not today.
as part of this budget.
I understand that.
Okay, so
I'm not confused.
It's not that we're spending ARPA money. There are suggestions about how we purchase items that are not in the budget, and the suggestion that they come from ARPA. But it doesn't. It's not funding from the tax money and the revenues that are coming into the budget.
I understand.
Okay.
We are talking about ARPA money, and when we appropriate it, doesn't really matter. We're just talking about how much money are we going to have available to us to use for municipal spending, and if we follow the budget, we've got about $3 million, and I'm not objecting to this, because I'm looking at the pool, and the pool of money, and I'm saying, okay, these are all. Again, I said all along, I'm hopeful we could do this in conjunction with the administration. Everyone's going to make concessions. Everyone's going to make, compromises. Each of us will probably have something important to us that we want to see done. And there's a lot of money to use. And I want us to get to that discussion where we talk about all those potential projects. If it turns out that there's $3 million less because we see that there's $3 million in expenditures that the mayor's proposing we cover with ARPA money, that's fine. There's an additional $1 million now, potentially, that Councilor Tad has proposed. That's okay. I'm not opposed to that either. But I don't want us to do any of this because we're afraid we're going to run it. We got to spend the money real quick, because we could do that next week. We could commit all $13 million in one meeting. So I don't want us to suddenly panic after 2 years and do something that we don't have to. I think we will look at that $5 million we agreed to set aside for the pool, and we may decide when we talk about the municipal project list that, maybe we will change our mind on that, and with the understanding that we could bond the whole pool project. But that's a discussion we could have. In principle, I like what Councilor Tata has proposed here, but I don't think we can get there. And even if we got halfway there, or close, we would certainly reduce the proposed tax increase. I'd love to see us be able to have no net increase in taxes. That's what we're all trying to do here. And I'll finish off by saying this. I think if we did accept this proposal completely, it would be inevitable that the administration would veto it. And then it's dead in totality. Any other changes we might make tonight will be dead. I feel fairly confident that we wouldn't have an override vote. But if we wanted to know whether we would, we'll just see how the vote on this goes. If the vote on this goes 6-3, 5-4, that's going to be the vote to override the veto. And while in principle, there's a lot of good things that could be done here, it all goes out the window with a mayoral veto. And a lot of work is done for nothing, and we didn't gain anything. So I guess I'll just leave, I'll end with suggesting to all of you to, let's see if maybe we can find a compromise here. And I like Councilor's proposal 1, and I'm willing to go with that, because I'm comfortable that I'll still be able to get some things done that I want to see done with the ARPA money, with the pool we have. I like just about everything she proposed. But I think maybe we look at that $2.9 million additional commitment from reserves and maybe cut that in half or change that to a point where it might be acceptable to enough people here in the administration that we could make some changes, we could get close to a zero tax increase, and we could still accomplish a lot of things. But let's see where that goes. That's my feelings on all this, so thanks for indulging me.
Councilor Fishbein?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Senna, I did find that report. I do thank you for that. I just bring to your attention that I think there are things missing from it, particularly D and E of the ordinance, which require all projects since June 30th of the prior fiscal year that have lapsed under the charter. And E is all incomplete capital and non-recurring projects, the date of the original approval and such reapprovals, and the amount of unexpended funds allocated to those projects. So if we're going to be talking about possibly shifting some of that money that's left in cap and non, I'd appreciate very much if we can get an update on some of that stuff. I'm looking at the projects that are in that report. As of February 1, it indicated there was almost $1 million in town-wide paving. It indicates here it wasn't even started. So, I think there's some updating perhaps that's needed for us to know about that. One of the things, the amendment that's before us takes certain things that were not addressed in the budget and puts within our purview to say that we care about them by advancing them. There's a level of stagnation versus vision that I think at some point we're going to have to deal with. For instance, a few weeks ago we were talking about the basketball court at Highland and whether or not Board of Ed has brought it up to a reasonable level. And I just happened to drive up there today, and I remember, on that front lawn, there used to be 2 tennis courts years ago. And I don't know, I didn't notice for whatever reason. And they did a community garden, I think, there for a while too. And that became like overrun. Well, that stuff's all gone now. And now there's this huge grass area in front of Highland, huge, along the roadway. Vision would say, put a couple pickleball courts there. It's one of the most used things we have in this town that we've done on this side of town. Put 2 pickleball courts. That's vision. I would have hoped that there was something in the mayor's budget that included something like that. I think that's something that we need. The land is just calling for it. I don't want those kids playing in the road out there. There's got to be an acre and a half of open land there. I'm in support of what's before us. I think that it adequately gives Board of Education things that they hadn't even anticipated, some of those capital expenditures. And I look forward to some sort of strategic plan over the next 5 years that we talked about, because certainly our kids are important. So I have no problem in supporting this. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Councilor Laffin.
Thank you. Councilor Testa basically addressed what I wanted to be recognized to say, to clarify. It is principal versus scale, 45% increase in the dependence on reserves for this budget. That's out of scale for me. Adequately, very well stated at every turn. I've been very focused on how I felt the ARPA money should be spent, over a year ago. And it's been dragged out, the process has taken forever, all the discussions and the arguments and the disagreements. And every time, I guess I always feel like we're at the end and we're not. But every time I turn around, we've spent or allocated more and more money for here and there without actually getting to what we originally talked about conceptually. And then, Mr. Mayor, or Mr. Senna, a question on the contingency item from number 5. This is great because let's cut something versus trying to maneuver or take money from other places. The contingency, do you have concerns about cutting it so it goes up and then we're going to cut that in half? I was wondering if there's some big court case we're expecting or something. Was there a reason why it jumped, and are we endangering the management of that?
So the contingency cuts do concern me. The accrued expenses, that's a number calculated by HR for contracts that are out and are going to be, once they're settled, we're going to owe retro pay and raises. So that number increased because one contract's out, and then so now you got to add another year to that.
Okay.
And then there's, in this current budget, the managers union, there's only a half a year raise in it because that contract's up January 1st. It's the only contract. And then keep in mind, we've had 2 very mild winters. So it looks like we haven't used contingency because we haven't had much overtime, sand, and purchases. Just snow. I don't know if we're going to have 3 calm winters alone, but we need money in contingency to deal with the winter if it happens.
And I'm sorry if I missed an earlier discussion on this at some point. Do we know, even quick off the top of your head, if not, then I'll flip through and figure it out. Do we know how much we didn't spend as expected or planned on snow removal this year because it was so warm?
If I was going to ballpark, I would say there's probably about 170,000 left
Okay. Thanks.
in the general contingency, not the payroll one.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Councilor Zandri.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So it took me a few minutes to get all these numbers together because I had to look them up, and I think I'm still off by $500,000 somewhere. There's an allocation I can't find. But just going back to the ARPA discussion, and I understand what the mayor has indicated, and he is technically correct that we're not allocating these funds today, but we're removing them from the budget, and we're saying we're going to use ARPA funds for them as we need them. So if we were to vote no, if the council's sitting up here at the time that they need to be line item allocated, if we said no, don't use the ARPA funds, then those things either wouldn't get done or they'd have to come out of somewhere else in the budget. By removing them from the taxable portion of the budget, and then earmarking them for use from ARPA is no different than what we've been doing for 20 years with CRRA money. We're basically saying that's what we're going to spend, and if we don't, then we've got an issue. The money won't get spent. So with ARPA, it started at $13 million, and we had initially outlined $3,250,000 for nonprofits, $3,250,000 for businesses, and the remainder was set aside for municipal purposes / community pool. That's how we threw it into that bucket. Now, what ended up happening was we got all of the applications back, and they totaled more than the 3.25 million in each bucket. And we as a council voted to raise both of those buckets. The nonprofit bucket went to 3.944 million, and the business bucket went to 3.44 million. That total is 7.3 million. That leaves us with 5.7 million. The mayor has put in 2.87 million as part of this use. 585, that's the one I was missing. All right, so then the mayor allocated 2.87 as part of this budget relief. That brings ARPA down to 2.8. So if we also include what Councilor Tata has proposed in her motion, another 1.1, this lowers the remaining ARPA available for allocation of 1.692 million. Now, if you want to take out the 585,000 that I missed, it's really 1.1 million. So again, these are all allocations, just like we allocate from the general fund balance. It's nothing that we've spent yet, but we are going to, because these are applications that are coming in for ARPA. These are items that have been removed. They will come back. So we're either sitting on, all right, so with the correction, 2.3 in ARPA or 1.1 in ARPA, depending on what action we take tonight. So the allocation is dropping, and there's less to use, but I wanted to make sure that everybody had an understanding of what's left over, because we understand kind of the original buckets that we shuffled everything into, but things have been moving along. So I just wanted to kind of make sure everybody had that as they thought about their decision this evening. Thank you.
Mr. Senate.
You're not missing the 500,000. That money was set aside for administration. Right, so that 500,000 that that's to pay the consultant.
It was for the consultant?
Well, it was set aside for administration.
That's why I
and
couldn't find it.
That's why you're off.
Yeah, and I couldn't find it. I know it was there, but I just didn't know where that allocation went to. Thank you, though.
Councilor Allenson.
So, when Councilor Zandri was talking just on that subject, we did try to put in 585,000 from ARPA in last year's budget, which the budget was approved, but through the end of the year at a glance, because I didn't look it up, or I wasn't able to see more than, we only actually allocated 15,000 in 2022, and then the Doolittle Park cameras this year. So we haven't actually allocated that full 585. In fact, I believe the mower is up again this year. So I just had a couple of comments to make. So regarding Counselor as in Attorney Farrell's letter, even if the House passes that bill, it has to go to the Senate, which is governed or controlled, I guess, if you will. The majority sits with a different party. So there's a possibility that wouldn't get through. So I feel like being reactionary with ARPA funds in that way is, I'm not really all for it. So, and also we have allocated millions of dollars in ARPA funds already. I mean, it's not as many as we have, but we've allocated them to businesses and nonprofits in the town that have been approved on consent and by formula. So, when we kept talking about ARPA, when we were in the onset of this, we all kept talking about wanting to do meaningful projects in the town. I know from my meetings with the different departments in the town that the library has an amazing courtyard that they would love to do. That would be a center of town, outside open space area that people could congregate, and we as a town could host events there as well with the library. I mean, when we talk about, we asked all of the departments for this wish list of projects that they'd love to do, and now we're using funds to essentially come to a net zero when inflation is high, when we have agreed to contracts where we pay people more because that's what you do. Everybody deserves to get a raise. We've also, we participate in our own private insurance, so we have to fund that, and when that goes up, it's not our fault, it's nobody's fault, but we have to recognize it as these are the decisions we've made in the past, and we have to stand by them. All of that being said, this proposed budget doesn't address anything regarding the Board of Ed budget, which even if we were to cast out every bit of strategic plan dollar, we would still be short by 2.8 million in sustained services. So essentially what we're telling people is, yeah, we'll go out and we'll employ you for a period of time, and then we'll lay you off when our budget doesn't fit the need. But also, let's talk about test scores, because we want to talk about having great test scores with less people under this proposed budget, which also is kind of a disgrace. All of that being said, I would completely agree to all of this, waiving my own hesitance to deplete the reserves if we put the 2.9 million back in for Board of Ed. Thank you.
Councilor Carmody.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This council had proposed using a substantial amount of ARPA funds for the restoration of community pool, but that was a non-starter with the administration. And if we do this proposal tonight, we will be using a substantial amount of ARPA funds, but there will still be leftover funds so we can discuss out of the box and transformational ideas with the use of ARPA funds. Otherwise, I think it is a good use of ARPA funds that Councilor Tata has proposed. These are important capital projects that need to get done, and I imagine we were all already supporting funding for these items. These projects support important segments of our community, our school system, public safety, public works, and I'm particularly excited about the idea of increasing funding for sidewalk repair. I would be willing to hear out alternatives that could get us across the finish line, as Councilor Testa suggested. But frankly, I do not think this is an unreasonable amount to use from reserves. Councilor Tata's proposal here will be able to accomplish pretty much everything we are setting out to do while also maintaining our tax levels. And so I am mainly in support of these adjustments, but I would like to hear, if there is something that we could get all of us over the finish line that we can agree on to get us there. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Councilor Allenson, you had one more.
I did also have one more thing. I think that it was just in regards to the strategic plan Board of Ed items that are proposed as part of this budget. I would not, so those do have to take back. I would not support those if we are not fully funding our educators and our staff.
Thank you. Councilor Tata, I do appreciate the time and effort you've put into this. It's clearly there's a lot of thought into it, Um, And certainly, you should be credited for that. I don't have a lot of problems with items 1 and 2 with the proposed use of ARPA funds. I think I think I'm fine with the use of spending for those purposes. I have historically not supported the council funding items without buy-in from the administration. So while I would like to see more attention to the downtown, uptown sidewalks, I'm not interested in funding something that I don't know the administration is going to see through. My question for the mayor or Mr. Senna is with respect to the proposed Board of Ed items, would these potentially be the type of capital items that we would bond? Do they have a long enough life that they could fit themselves into some type of bonding package?
I think we removed them from the bonding for the track and field because we did not see them as a long enough term of life.
Thank you. I have an issue with further challenging the contingency in light of our inability to perfectly predict the future. That's why a budget's an estimate. It's based on what we've experienced over the years. We experience ebb and flows in winters. We had a particularly mild winter this year. I would dare say unusually mild, and you know, if you like winter, it was a disappointment. If you don't like winter, you enjoyed it. Nonetheless, we can't count on that kind of a mild winter going forward for the coming years. I do take issue with a 45% increase in dependency on reserves. The scale is a problem. We have been warned by Moody's, as Councilor Laffin pointed out, that this does challenge our credit rating. Our credit rating is more relevant of late because we do have projects for which we are going to go out to bond. We've committed to them already. So our bond rating becomes critically important. As a general principle, when we get rated for bonding, that is a completely objective review of the town's budgeting practices. You know, you can say that it's not a big deal if our bond rating moves down a little bit, but we've been rated as excellent for our budgetary practices, our spending practices, our fiscal management, and I don't think that it makes a ton of sense to challenge that, to get in the face of it. So those are my thoughts. If there's room for movement, you know, we could certainly get something that the mayor is not interested in vetoing. Councilor Testa?
Well, I would throw this suggestion out there, and that is I noticed in (2021-22), the designated reserves were 7.9 million. We have gone that high, and so if we were to amend Councilor Tada's proposal to increase the use of reserves by another 1.5 million, that would put the total amount at 7.9, which in effect still leaves us $1.4 million short of zeroing out. So in effect, I know Mr. Senna told us in order to get to a zero increase in the mill rate, we would need $3.771 million in reductions to the budget. this would leave us at $1.4 million increase in the budget. I'm just curious, would you be able to do a quick calculation, Mr. Senna, as to, based on what the current budget increase is going to be in the mill rate and what a $1.4 million total increase in the budget would result in? Just curious.
No, that's not a quick calculation. I'd have to go upstairs to do that.
All right. Well, if I'm looking at, I lost my budget book. Where'd it go? Here it is. Well, the budget letter lets us know that the budget that's been proposed would be an increase of 0.83 mils, or 2.86. And I'm going to be embarrassed if my math is wrong, but, or if my...
I'm more than willing to go upstairs to go put it...
No, I mean, we could rough it. It's just, this is for my colleagues' benefit. But I correct in assuming that, based on your letter, in order to get to a zero, we'd have to reduce the budget by 3.771 million, correct? All right. So if we do what I just said, we would reduce by 2.371, which is two-thirds, roughly. So the mill rate, instead of going up by 0.83 mils, will go up by roughly 0.27. That was very approximation, just to give everybody an idea. We wouldn't get to zero. It may be palatable, or hopefully digestible by the administration, and we would see an increase in the mill rate of roughly 0.25% instead of 0.83. So I guess I'll start, because we are working on a motion right now, correct?
Yes.
So I'm at least going to propose an amendment to Councilor Tada's motion that to change the additional appropriation from reserves to 1.5 million instead of 2.9, and everything else as is. That's my amendment, my motion for an amendment.
Is there a second?
Seconded for discussion.
Yeah.
Moved and seconded.
And I think my conclusions are fairly accurate. That the net, again, we're not going to have exact numbers right now, but basically, we would see, we would reduce the proposed tax increase by about 68%. Two-thirds, roughly. Almost three-quarters, frankly. So it's up there for discussion.
Councilor Tada?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. While I appreciate the compromise, at this point, I'm not supportive. So I'm looking at the year you were looking at, 21-22, where it was 7.9 was the designated reserves that we said in the budget we were going to spend. We spent 0, and the end of the year surplus was close to $1 million. So again, if we look historically the past 20 years at what's happened, this number is basically meaningless. And we could say we're going to appropriate $28 million. Doesn't mean we're going to use it. We're not using it. So I think we all know that, if we look at the outcomes of all of our budgets for the past 20 years, while using maybe a lower amount might make it more palatable to some, I think we all know, even the mayor's appropriation of 6.4 million, we're never going to even come close to touching. So by reducing that, it's maybe it's a feel-good measure, I think. Maybe it makes people a little less skittish to have that number get as high as I'm proposing. But I think in actuality, it's really irrelevant what that number is, because we all know that we're not even going to come close to touching that. Yeah, there's one other thing I want to say, but not specifically about this motion. So I'll wait for that. Thank you.
May I just reply to that, Mr. Chairman?
Sure.
I just want to clarify, I don't see it as a feel-good measure. I see it as a pragmatic, extremely pragmatic effort. I agree with what you're saying. But I'm trying to come up with something that may pass. It may happen. So, and that's what I try to focus on up here, is actually getting something done. And if it actually could happen, we could get close to where you wanted to take us, and we all would want to be there. I think finding that number, again, it potentially makes it acceptable to the administration, and the number could realistically be something that would be more palatable and agreeable to our credit rating agencies, because they've seen that number before. That's kind of what my point was. It's not just trying to find something to make people feel good, because if it fails completely, what's the point? That's why I proposed it. Thank you.
Councilor Zandri?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I tried to run the numbers real quick that we were talking about with the differential between the 2.9 and cutting it back to, I'm not the 2.9, yeah, the 2.9 addings, which would bring it to 9.3, which would, and then the difference that Councilor Testa outlined at 7.9, and also taking a look at the fact that some of the change in the budget, because we got to remember, this budget moved from $180 million basically to $187 million. A chunk of that comes from a grand list increase of 1.4 million. This is, right now, the way that the budget is set up, it is affecting the average residential property at about $158 additional dollars. And I believe that if we were to institute the change in the amended motion, that would make the tax increase about $80, give or take. And again, to Councilor Testa's point, it kind of makes it, potentially more palatable to the administration. And that's the key factor here, right? Because I 100% agree with Councilor Tata. We could designate $6 million, $10 million, $15 million. We never spend more than 1.7, ever. So it almost doesn't matter what we do. We designate this money so that the budget is balanced, and we're not taxing more and then but increasing the savings account. The argument goes to the earlier points that were being made. Whether there's 5 votes, whether there's 6 votes, that's also going to be the override vote. And I don't know what the number would be that would allow the administration to say, I don't like it, but we've done something similar before, and maybe we let it ride, because we have to all know that whatever way this vote goes, so goes the veto budget. So that's why I wanted to bring it up for discussion, to see if anybody had an interest of trying to go halfway, although I cannot argue Councilor Tata's point. She has, this is sound work, and all the math is there, but it just goes back to, and the reasoning is sound, of doesn't matter whether you take $3,000 extra dollars or $6,000 out of your savings account if you don't use it all. The issue always is, are we going to use it all? We've never used it all. We've never used more than 15% of what we've allocated. It's just going to be a matter of what the mayor will leave alone on a veto vote. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Councilor Marone?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I guess I more or less agree with Councilor Zandri. I liked the original proposal. If I thought that the compromise would get it, the 7 votes to override a veto, then I would support that. I mean, I'll support the amendment for no other reason than, I think it's sort of like getting me halfway to where I want it to be anyway. So I don't really have an issue with the amendment. I think there's philosophically, you're going to have people that are going to be, like, I'm not in the no tax increase camp, right? I think that sometimes you have, certainly taxes, expense for everything goes up. Sometimes you have to raise taxes, and that's part of the reality. But I also think that in this budget, sort of the tax increase, we're not really increasing services. We're not really doing anything additional. We're just kind of like kicking the can down the road. So I will support the amendment. I would support, the original proposal. I guess the real question is without putting too fine a point on it, I think we've had sort of the same folks that were looking to not change things. So I guess really, the only real metric is, are any of those folks interested in, any kind of a compromise? And if they're not, then it's, there's not a lot to talk about. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Senna?
Councilman Marone, you just said there was no new services in this budget, and I would disagree. There is, in this budget, there's 4 new school resource officers budgeted, there's 4 new firefighters budgeted, and there's 2 public works employees budgeted, which is over and above what we had the year before. So I would say there is an increase in services in this budget.
There's also an increase in cost. Almost every bargaining unit in town has somewhere near a 2% raise in this budget. So the cost of running the town has gone up. 12% increase in insurance. Councilor Marone.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I guess this is sort of where you come down to the semantics of like an increased service, right? So if you added garbage, I'm not proposing that we ever should, but if you added garbage service, that's like an increase in service. To add police officers or firemen or firefighters, while it is an increase in services in a certain sense, you're just sort of enhancing the service that you're already providing. So, I think that could kind of cut both ways. But, your point is well taken. Thank you, sir.
Seeing no other hands up here, I ask if there's anybody in the public who'd like to speak. Reminder, just name and address for the record, please.
Riley O'Connell, Edgerton Road. It's been a while since I've been up here. I really appreciate Councilor Tata and a lot of other points made, but especially bringing up the 21-22 budget, which was the last budget where the veto was overturned. And like you said, a couple more million, a few more million was taken out of reserves. And ultimately, there was still a close to $1 million surplus. So if that had not happened, it would have been closer to a $3-4 million surplus. And I just want to make it very clear to folks that are watching tonight what that surplus really is. That's $3 to $4 million more dollars that we're taking out of residents' pockets without spending it, with no intention to spend it. At a time when people are looking more at the gas meter, more at their grocery store bill than at least probably in my lifetime or close to my lifetime. So these are real dollars affecting real people. So I do want to highlight that. I do think at the very least these amendments help us get towards that goal of making Wallingford more affordable. And while I really appreciate the conversations that a lot of our councilors are having, and they're the right ones to have, in terms of making these amendments more palatable for the administration and some of the other councilors, it's just it's unfortunate that we have to look at it this way as opposed to just looking at what's best for Wallingford residents and what's palatable for them. And again, you're doing the right thing. We need to do this because some of these amendments passing is better than none. But I just think that's a sad state of affairs. That's how we have to frame this conversation. Thank you.
All All right, seeing no further hands in the audience, I bring it back to the council first for the vote on the amendment.
Counselor Allenson?
No.
Counselor Carmody?
Yes.
Counselor Fishbein?
No.
Counselor Laffin?
No.
Counselor Marone?
Yes.
Counselor Tata?
No.
Counselor Testa?
Yes.
Counselor Zandri?
Yes.
And Chairman Cervoni.
I vote yes, the amendment passes. Now, if there's no further amendments, then it's...
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Carmody.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had spoken about this topic at our April 11th budget workshop. I think it is important that the mayor's salary is commensurate to the role of the job, which is significant, obviously. I do not think the salary is commensurate now, and I do not think it is a competitive salary for this role. The mayor of our town is the manager of our town, and when you compare the current salary, which is $96,000, to the salary of town managers and mayors in surrounding towns, ours is lower. It is also much lower than many of the town staff that is managed by the mayor. Cheshire's proposed budget this year planned for a salary for its town manager of $176,500, and Southington's was $184,265, and Merredin's $169,792. The town of Hamden's proposed salary for their mayor this year was listed at $120,000. Our town's charter only allows us to raise the mayor's salary in an election year. As we know, this election year will have an open seat. So this applies to no one specific. It applies to the position. Again, I think the salary needs to be commensurate with its role and competitive, and I think this is the year to do it. So I would like to make a motion to raise the mayor's annual salary to $130,000 in this year's budget. Mr. Chairman, I would suggest that we make a slight adjustment, fractional change to the mill rate to increase the general fund revenues to pay for this additional $34,000.
Second.
Unless somebody has a better idea to find that $34,000.
Moved and seconded. Discussion on the motion. Councilor Tata.
Point of order, Mr. Chairman. I believe that, so we just voted on the amendment to the motion on the table. So there's still the motion on the table for my initial motion as amended.
This is proposed as a further amendment.
Councilor Carmody doesn't seem so sure. Is
Yeah,
that what your intent?
Is that the best process to do? I mean, I could
Well,
wait till we vote on this and then.
We can go either way. I mean, if you don't intend it as an amendment, Councilor Tata is correct. And we should call the vote on her motion before yours.
Then I'll hold back and make that motion following this vote.
Okay.
Thank you. And then,
I'll withdraw the motion.
Yeah, and I'll
Dr.
withdraw the
Zandri
second.
withdraws the
I thought it was an add-on, so if it's a separate item, then.
thank you. So in regard to the amended motion, now it's on the table. So now I'm in the difficult position where I potentially have to vote against my own package as amended. As I started out, I had four outcomes that were important, which is what steered all of these. And number one was no tax increase. The reason I think that's so important is because there's no need to have it. We're taxing people with money that we never intend to spend. I think the discussion about, the appropriation from reserves already explained that, but I still feel that way. I feel like we are overtaxing people, and I can't, in good conscience, overtax the people of this town when I know that overtaxation will not be spent. That's where I stand right now, so I'm in the difficult position now of potentially having to vote no on the package. Thank you.
Councilor Morone.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Very briefly, I can't disagree with anything that the Councilor Tata said. I really appreciate the work she put into this. I think, so here's where the difficult part is for me, right? Because here's the option. And I'm mainly speaking to my two friends and co-councilors on my left and right. So if we potentially have the ability to reduce the tax increase based on the proposed package that Councilor Tata proposed with the amendment, if you vote no, then you still get the tax increase, right? If you can't override the veto, then you still get the larger tax increase. So I guess my estimation is I would rather go with the lesser tax increase than the greater tax increase, agreeing with all of the principles that you set forward, that none of it's necessary, but I guess if I have the ability to rein it in a little bit, it's better than not reining it in at all, right? So I could have the Pyrrhic victory to vote for a budget that I know will never pass, and then, on principle, but I guess the reality is I'd rather try to save, some money in the short term. So that's it, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Zandri?
Yeah, I'd like to take a quick moment to echo Councilor Marone's sentiment, because I agree with him. There's a lot of good stuff in this proposed amendments. The work that went into this was long, I'm sure, and it does so many good things, right? It goes and provides additional services for the fire department. It handles and manages sidewalk repairs uptown. It adds additional spending for the schools. It does a lot of positive things. And again, to Councilor Marone's point, what was brought forward was a no tax increase. That would have been like the home run. But I'm looking at this as like I still wouldn't mind getting a double and getting on base. It's less of a tax increase that's being proposed, and it's more things served as service to the town than what's in the current budget. And while it's still a partial tax increase, it is still a very small one based on inflationary pressures and based on the original budget. The original budget going up $7 million is a 3.88% increase the way that the mayor has it outlined, and the mill rate change going from 29.04 to the proposed 29.87. So in a year when inflation was, I don't have it, it looks like it was rounded out at almost 6%, I think that's a pretty good deal, considering even the wage pressures that are in here. So, is this veto-proof? I don't think so. I think it's got a possibility. Could we maybe get 7 votes out of it if we needed it? I don't know that either, but it's more palatable than what was, the end result of what we just had. And I think that the argument is better. We are still no higher than any other designated reserve use year, knowing that we won't spend it anyway. So hopefully this is something that folks can consider. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I see no other hands. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll? This is on the motion as amended.
Counselor Allenson?
No.
Counselor Carmody?
Yes.
Counselor Fishbein?
No.
Counselor Laffin?
Yes.
Counselor Marone?
Yes.
Counselor Tata?
No.
Counselor Testa?
Yes.
Counselor Zandri?
Yes.
And Chairman Cervoni.
Yes. Motion passes. Counselor Carmody.
Thank you. I'll make my motion at the proper time now. I would like to make a motion to raise the mayor's annual salary to $130,000 in this year's budget.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Discussion on the council. Any questions or comments from the public? There being none, Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Counselor Allenson?
I can't vote on a raise for the mayoral position as long as we plan on laying people off, so no.
Counselor Carmody?
Yes.
Counselor Fishbein?
No.
Counselor Laffin?
Yes.
Counselor Marone? Counselor Tata?
Abstain.
Counselor Testa?
I find myself in a difficult situation as an announced candidate. I feel strongly that this is good, but,
None of the announced candidates have won yet.
yeah, I know, but it seems,
Or secure their nomination.
I'm going to vote yes.
Counselor Zandri?
Yes.
And Chairman Cervoni?
Yes, motion passes. Any other motions on the budget?
Yes.
Go ahead. Counselor Allenson.
I know where this is going because I've already made comments regarding it, but far be it for me not to at least try. I'd like to propose that, I'd like to make a motion that we increase the Board of Ed sustained services budget by $2 million to avoid inevitable layoffs that are going to happen if we cut their budget by the 2.9 that's currently proposed.
I'll second it for discussion.
Moved and seconded. Further discussion on the motion? Counselor Tata?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just for clarification for the public, so the Board of Ed budget, we cannot determine line item expenditures, unlike every other department in town. So the amount of their requested increase was reduced by the mayor. They still do have an increase, but we cannot tell them what to do. So just to say that the layoffs are going to occur if we don't propose this, I do not think is an inevitable outcome if this amendment is not adopted. Thank you.
Counselor Allenson?
Yes, you're correct that we can't allocate funds to specific lines in the Board of Ed budget, yet we just passed 4 of them. So I think that's talking out of both sides of our mouths. And $3.5 million, so 7.89 million of that was for strategic plan items. There isn't really anything else in the sustained services budget besides maintaining our facilities, keeping our heat on, and employing our staff for the Board of Ed. The strategic plan items that we are proposing as part of the amended budget that just passed adds $400,000-ish, $300,000 to the strategic budget, just under 300, 290, to the strategic plan budget that we're saying that we can't. I mean, sure, they can then take that money and try to fund the sustained services budget since we can't allocate things as such. However, we talk a lot here about test scores and doing right by our kids and finding creative ways to do all of the things that need doing in the town. It's not going to be, this is not going to be easy, but by not funding the people and services that we currently have, we are saying that we are planning on having a deficit in services and payroll next year. We're also punishing Board of Ed for an increase for the increases that we approved, or the administration approved when we approved contracts. It's also not punishing the Board of Ed, but it's removing the funds that we've already approved in order to sustain the services that we have. If we don't continue to sustain services, the definition of sustained is as is right now. I mean, don't write to Webster about that. It's probably not exactly the definition. But that is, so in order to keep all things equal, and like we talk about class sizes, we have now discussed the idea of 2 schools versus 1 school, which we would have to bond. We've gone down this road, and now we're not willing to fund it. So I mean, I know I'm kind of alone in my soapbox here because not one person even responded to my comments earlier. So, but it absolutely is not responsible by the students in our town to say, go ahead and increase the class sizes. We don't know what we're going to do about 1 school versus 2, and we also have this police bonding project, but let's go ahead and deplete the reserves. And like, I get it that all of this is concerning on 2 sides of things, but at the very foundation, the kids in school right now are the future us's sitting up here, maybe not specifically in Wallingford, but if we don't educate them properly and we increase their class sizes, but we're willing to stand on a soapbox of 1 versus 2 schools, what service are we really doing the community? So again, I realize that I'm probably not going to get a lot of support here because we're more concerned a lot of times about projects than we are about people, but you have to be concerned about people, and you can't continue to go down the path of cutting services as they exist now and adding money to do things somewhere else, especially when it comes to education. Education is the foundation for all of us. It is the reason why every single one of us can read, write, in my case, maybe poorly do math, although I did get the approval from Mr. Senna. This is the reason why we all are here, and the reason why we all do what we do. We want to have a better future. What better way to invest the town's money than in education? And of course, I say this because I'm biased, just coming off of Board of Ed, and I completely, but maybe that's because I understand their sustained services budget because I went through it. So again, I appreciate your candor. Councilor Tata, you did a phenomenal job on your motion, and there's nothing that I can fault you on. And while I didn't support it, there is no recognition that I cannot give you about the amount of work that went into it. So it's really nothing personal. I completely appreciate the work. I just also would argue that somebody taught you how to do this. So that's why I'm saying school is important. And I have actually said several times before tonight and tonight that I feel that this process is actually a little bit backwards. I think that if we were to have motions, we should be able to talk about them before we have a motion and have to decide in a mostly usually 5-hour meeting where we all go back and forth, because there are some really great things, but because of FOI and I don't know, maybe the charter, we are not allowed to discuss, as the 9 of us, with the mayor, anything outside of a meeting. And we might actually become able to approve something as a whole if we put all of this work, which is, again, phenomenal, combine it with the mayor's work and his experience of all of the departments. This is not a great way to do a budget when it's just 2 parties arguing with each other. And I mean, I know I'm off topic now, but I did not mean, I was not trying to throw shade by saying somebody taught you that, by the way. I'm just saying it just kind of, it stands with my point. I think that you're doing an amazing job, so thank you.
Councilor Zandri.
Councilor Allens, the dollar amount was how much again?
So I proposed 2 million because I feel like there could be some ways that we could figure out the other 900,000. So Board of Ed, in their basically, their sustained services, their budget was cut by 3.5 million. If they were to remove every piece of strategic, that's about 778,000. So it leaves 2.8 million on the table. Perhaps with some creative scheduling or creative accreditation or whatever, the Board of Ed can come up with a way to save that extra 800,000. But I'm very concerned about the potential rise in class sizes and reduced services of paras and possible mental health, especially now that we're putting in resource officers into the schools because we have behavioral problems. So, sorry, but yes, my proposal is for 2 million. So unfortunately, it essentially negates the removal, a lot of the removal of the budget that Councilor Tata pulled out of the services and put to ARPA. So it basically erodes 2 million of that $2.8 million savings. I'm trying to get there to a reasonable tax increase by without taking away a product from our community.
Thanks, because that was part of where I was trying to go with this, is that would be, again, my quick math, about 0.44 mils. So the worst case scenario is that this almost brings it back to the original tax increase that the mayor originally put in as a flat budget with all of our different amendments in it. So we could effectively still do basically everything that the original amendments were, minus the tax increase. Councilor Carmody's motion, and then if yours is supported, it's at the same impact. So I want everybody to understand that. We already released a letter to the citizens saying, hey, basically we're looking at a change in your taxes on a residential parcel at about $190,000 assessed of about $158. If this were to pass, we're probably still about the same ballpark number, give or take $10, and with all of these added changes and increases. So I would like to ask all of my peers up here to consider that. I mean, I know the target of the original motion was no tax increase. We got a smaller tax increase. We've done something additional. Now we're considering this to benefit the students, and it won't move the needle that much on the taxpayer. It's just something to think about. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Councilor Marone.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the only difference is the money that we budget on the town side can get spent or not spent. The money that we give to the Board of Education, once it's given to the Board of Education, they're free to spend it however they want. So I don't really think it's a fair comparison to say it balances the scales in a certain sense, but like I think the Councilor Tad's proposal was based on the idea that we know the mayor's not going to spend the $7 million from reserves, right? But so if you take $2 million of that and you assign it to the Board of Ed, then they have every right to spend it because it's now their money. So that's why I don't think it's necessarily an apt comparison. Philosophically, I have kids in school, right? Like a couple other people up here, I have kids in two different schools, right? So on the one hand, I think money for education, a free and public education is like a cornerstone of our American democracy, right? But on the other hand, I can't reason that a school system could grow by 7% a year, reasonably. I mean, the college situation is colleges sort of appreciate 5% a year ad infinitum, right? And so that's why the cost of college is so outrageous. I also see things, and I'm trying to stay in my lane as best I can, but as a parent, you see things in school that you think are perhaps wasteful or maybe not entirely necessary, right? But I can't go through the Board of Education budget and say, cut this, right? Because that's not in my lane. So philosophically, I'm not sure where I stand. I guess I'm more against than for. As much as I want to help education, I think that we need to understand what the percentage we think education should be allowed to grow in a year, and then we can kind of figure it out from there, right? Just kind of the same thing I apply to our budget is that, if the grand list grows by a certain percentage of the total tax burden, how much are you willing to raise taxes to accommodate the objectives you need to get to? You know, there's things that I supported when I was on the Board of Education that I think were probably not a good, I believed in at the time. I believe firmly at the time, but have probably not panned out. But it's hard to get rid of any kind of a program that you start, whether it be in the schools or in regular government, is very hard to eliminate. So, I don't know, I think there's some other ways that maybe you could thin down the budget, some unnecessary positions and such, you know, in the Board of Ed. So, I guess that's my roundabout way of saying I really appreciate the effort, but I'm probably going to take a pass on this one. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Counselor Zandri.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick follow-up. Looking at the education request, I just want to make sure I got the right number here. Board of Education requested an increase of 6.22%, and the proposed budget increase is only 3.02, which cut $3 million. If we restore $2 million, it doesn't quite bring it all the way back to 6.22. I didn't do all the math, but it's about 5.9.
So this is the proposed.
Right, the proposed is 3.2, but the original was 6. So even by doing what we're doing here, we are basically right at target on the changes to CPI for last year. So just wage pressures, cost of oil, you know, if you ball it all together, putting this $2 million in, they didn't exceed inflation. So I agree, Councilor Marone, that you know, you can't just have sustained 5%, 6% every single year. I agree with that. But in light of the year we had, where they're coming from and what they're trying to budget to, it's an inline ask based on inflation. So I hope that folks also up here can consider that as well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Counselor Fishbein.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Senna, are you following along with where we are? Just, I'm just trying to figure out, I mean, is it roller coaster? Yeah, I guess it's a roller coaster. As far as where the tax increase, you know, we walked in the door tonight with the tax increase at a certain percentage, right? And then we had a proposal that it go to 0. And then we had a proposal that it get increased, but not to the level that the mayor was at. And then we added to that because we increased the mayor's salary, which is a tax increase. So now we're putting $2 million on top of that. So can I take the beginning, walking in the door tonight where we were, because it appears that the motion that's before us increases the tax increase that even the mayor proposed.
No, it doesn't.
So the reason why we have this meeting is so I can go back and get you guys the real numbers before the real vote on it.
Yeah.
So I haven't even had time to make sure that the numbers in here actually got to a 0.
Okay.
So the original packet, I haven't been able to confirm whether, you know, the
'Cause I'm
math
just looking
was
at-
right on that.
You know, coming in tonight, let's just say we were at 5%, let's just say, okay? And the proposal that was put on the table brought us to a 0 on a tax increase. But then that was modified partially to take generally half of what the proposal was, to take that in additional reserves, because I think it went from 2.9 to 1.5. So,
Can I?
sure.
Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but
No, it's,
the way I can kind of do it quick is this would be an additional tax increase, because if we want to look at it real quick, the original amendment was to take 1.5 million of the 0 tax increase. Now this motion's adding 2 million more back, so you'd be about $500,000 higher than where we began.
yeah, so it's even higher than, it's a higher tax increase than we walked in the door.
Correct.
Okay. So, but you don't know how much, and that's fair.
$500,000 is Just give me a second, I can tell you.
Sure, that'd be great.
.11?
It says in the letter that it increases taxes by 135, by 3,324,000. Then, so with the 1.11.
I believe it's .11 increase.
Okay. On top of what the mayor had proposed. Okay, well, thank you, that's helpful. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Councilor Tata.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just in regards to the comments made before, in regards to speaking out of both sides of my mouth in regards to proposal number 4, the proposal stated that we restore the following education spending, and then it notes 3 specific items. The proposal is just was to restore that money. The hope would be that the Board of Ed would use it for those purposes, but obviously recognizes that the council cannot make the board use the money for those purposes. So, you know, the insinuation of speaking out of both sides of my mouth or who taught me how to do this, you know, I would just say I agree with me or disagree with me. I always try to be respectful to all of my fellow councilors. I hope that I always do that, and I would expect that in return. And Mr. Chairman, I believe that some of that responsibility falls on you to make sure we are all treated respectfully by each other. I would also like to question, just as Mr. Chairman, you questioned me in the beginning of where the money would come from. I'm wondering where this additional money would come from. I'm assuming that the revenues need to be increased to cover this, which it sounds like will be a tax increase. I just want to be clear that that's where the money is coming from.
Correct. A tax increase. And I mean, I would further propose that we don't do any of the strategic items in Area 4 while we can't fully fund a sustained service budget. But that isn't on the table at this point because that has already been approved, so.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Councilor Zandri.
Yeah, just based on the numbers I got from Mr. Senna and doing a rough estimate, we're talking about a $30 additional tax increase, if anybody's interested.
I just want to address Councilor Tata's comments regarding my responsibility. When I was listening to Councilor Allenson talk about speaking out of both sides of someone's mouth, I didn't hear that as directed at one person. I heard it as directed at the entire council. As for the rest of the comments, sorry, I didn't perceive them to be disrespectful, but there was no intention to allow something disrespectful to occur. Any comments from the public? Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll? Oh, I'm sorry.
Please name and number for the record.
Tammy Raccio, 123 Chimney Hill Road. I just want to remind the council that we bring you contracts to approve. You've approved the transportation increase that's in that budget. You give us the insurance amount to put in that budget. By default of not approving all of the labor agreements that we bring to you, they in effect go into effect. So it is a little disingenuous to approve the contracts and then non-fund them. There will be layoffs with this underfunded sustained budget. The layoffs will not be equal across all unions. Some unions, we have to lay off every part-time person before we could lay off a full-time person. Some unions, there are only full-time people in them. So it will not be head count by head count, union by union equal. And it will have, this large of a cut will have a definite direct impact on student-facing services. And lastly, I just want to remind you, when we did the budget presentation and we sat there, what those calls were from 211 and the needs, the mental health needs of our students post-COVID. This is the worst possible time to cut sustained services and cut it by this much. Thank you.
All right. Counselor Zandri?
Yeah, I just wanted one quick follow-up. Thank you, Chairman Raccio, for coming up here. That's a very good point. How many times have we sat up here and argued about all the unfunded mandates that we get from Hartford? And here we are doing it locally. I don't think we can do that. I don't think we should do that, and I think we really should consider supporting this. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Counselor Tata?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is the first time I'm hearing of layoffs. When the Board of Ed was before us on the night of their budget meeting, I don't think that ever came up. I don't recall it coming up. And I didn't. I'm just, this whole thing is kind of shocking to me, because I would have thought it would have come up at the presentation, and now we're here saying that if this motion isn't approved, that there's going to be layoffs. So again, it just caught me a little bit off guard. That's all. Thank you.
Seeing no other hands, Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Counselor Allenson?
Yes.
Counselor Carmody?
No.
Counselor Fishbein?
No.
Counselor Laffin?
No.
Counselor Marone?
No.
Counselor Tata?
No.
Counselor Testa?
No.
Counselor Zandri?
Yes.
And Chairman Cervoni.
No. Any other motions on the budget? There being none, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Oh, Mr. Senna, my apologies.
Sorry, I just want to point out for the mayor's raise, that will only increase this budget by $17,000 because it will only be a half a year. So just want to point that out when I give you the numbers out. That's why the number is 17 and not 34.
Wait, point of information, Mr. Chairman. I thought we could only increase the mayor's salary on the off, like it would be effective next year.
It becomes effective January 1.
Oh.
So that's why it's...
Yeah. All right, sorry, I'm new here. Thank you.
One point I'd like to make too. I just want to apologize to Councilor Tata. It wasn't my intent to offend you. Thank you.
All right. There's a motion and a second to adjourn this meeting. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, we're adjourned.